Okay, so this Jessica Lynch story you wanted to look at,
Yes,
a really interesting one,
it is.
especially in how the media portrays women during wartime.
Uh-huh.
You sent over this fascinating article, War Propaganda
Yeah.
and the AB Uses of Women, Meet the
Yeah.
Constructions of the Jessica Lynch Story.
Yes.
It's from the 2004 Feminist Media Studies Journal by Deepa Kumar.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really interesting take on how the media and the military even
Right.
shaped the story
Yeah.
and what it tells us about how women are portrayed in war in general.
Well, it's interesting because women in war stories are often cast in very specific roles.
Oh, totally. Like that classic damsel in distress.
Yeah.
You know, that helpless victim that needs to be saved.
You think about those old recruitment posters,
Mm-hmm.
with the woman cowering in fear with the enemy approaching.
Right.
And the message is so clear.
Like enlist to protect our women.
Exactly. Become a hero. Save the girl.
Yeah.
And then you have the other side of that coin.
Huh?
The woman on the home front.
Right.
Strong and determined.
Yeah.
Rallying the nation to support the war effort.
Like Rosie the Riveter.
Exactly.
You know, we can do it.
Yeah. And both of those portrayals, they seem so different.
They do.
But they reinforce these traditional gender roles.
Yeah, they really do.
They do.
So what does Deepa Kumar say?
Well, she argues that there are even more nuanced roles at play.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she talks about camp followers.
Okay.
These are women who have historically provided really essential services to the military.
Okay.
So everything from like cooking and cleaning to nursing and
Yeah.
even prostitution, unfortunately.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a side of war that we don't often talk about,
We don't.
but it's a huge part of it.
Yeah. And it makes you think about how even when women are contributing so much,
Yeah.
they're still often like...
Relegated to
Yeah.
these subservient positions.
Yeah, totally.
Exactly.
Okay.
Then you have the
The
viragos.
Ragos.
Kumar uses this term to describe powerful women who really challenge those traditional gender roles.
Okay.
Like Margaret Thatcher.
Oh, yeah.
Or even historical figures like Queen Elizabeth I,
Right.
who led armies
Mm.
and held so much political power.
Those are some powerful women.
They are.
So then what's the next one?
You have the androgynous warrior.
Okay.
This is the woman who fights alongside men,
Okay.
but often by suppressing any traditionally feminine traits.
Like Demi Moore in G.I. Jane.
Exactly.
Shaving her head
Yes.
and just going through it all.
Pushing herself to those same physical standards as men.
Yeah, totally.
But here's the thing. Kumar's point is that all of these roles,
Okay.
as diverse as they may seem,
Uh-huh.
can still be limiting.
Okay.
And they're often exploited by the military.
To further their own agenda.
Exactly.
Look, we're all about equality. Women can fight too.
Right.
But it's really all about using that as justification for their actions.
Right. Which brings us to Jessica Lynch.
Yeah.
To really understand how her story was constructed, I think we need to understand the context of the time.
Okay.
So March 2003, the Iraq War is in its early stages.
Uh-huh.
And the Bush administration had really predicted this swift victory.
They did.
Things weren't unfolding quite as they'd hoped.
Right. It was a little more complicated than they thought it was going to be.
Public support for the war was waning.
Yeah.
People were starting to question the justification for the invasion.
Especially because those weapons of mass destruction
Yeah.
that they said were there,
The whole reason for going to war.
they were nowhere to be found.
They weren't.
So enter Jessica Lynch,
Yeah.
19 years old,
A supply clerk,
part of a maintenance company.
not a frontline combat soldier.
Right. And that distinction is crucial
Yes,
because the media really latched onto her story.
they did.
And the early reports really played up how vulnerable she was. Like every little detail was meant to paint this picture
Yes.
of this young, helpless woman in danger.
Her age, her petite size, the fact that she wasn't a combat soldier. It all fed into this narrative
Of vulnerability.
of vulnerability.
Yeah, and then there were those reports of her injuries,
Yeah.
being shot and stabbed multiple times.
It created this image
I know.
of her suffering at the hands of this brutal enemy.
And then there was the story of Muhammad,
Yes.
this Iraqi lawyer.
Yes, the Iraqi lawyer who supposedly saw Lynch being abused,
Right.
and he bravely tipped off U.S. forces.
It's like a movie.
It is.
Like this brave local man risking his life
Yes.
to save this innocent American woman.
Powerful imagery.
It is powerful imagery.
Remember, this was before she was even rescued. We
Right.
were already building this whole narrative.
So by the time the rescue did happen,
Yes.
it was portrayed as this daring nighttime raid.
Special forces swooping in to save her from evil.
Classic hero stuff.
Absolutely playing into that good versus evil dichotomy that we see.
Which is so common in wartime.
Yes, wartime propaganda.
Yeah, and some media outlets even claim that she fought back against her captors.
I know.
Fired her weapon until she ran out of ammo.
It's like she's a female Rambo.
Totally.
So you have this blend of victimhood and heroism,
Right.
carefully constructed to evoke a very specific response
From the American people.
from the public.
And it worked.
It did.
Her story blew up.
Oh yeah, Newsweek and people ran huge features,
Yeah.
creating this whole hero biography.
Like small town girl,
Wholesome.
blonde, blue-eyed, relatable.
The all-American girl.
Yeah.
Which is a classic example of how heroic biography shapes national identity.
It's true.
You take an individual story, you highlight certain aspects, and use it to represent the values and ideals of a nation.
So Jessica Lynch,
Yes.
this vulnerable yet brave soldier.
Became a symbol of America itself.
Right.
Wounded but resilient.
Fighting for freedom
Yes.
against a cruel enemy.
It's interesting, though, because you compare her story to other women who were involved in the war at the same time. Kumar points out that Rachel Corrie and Shoshana Johnson, they received far less media attention.
And they were both deeply involved.
They were.
So why is that?
Why do you think that is?
I mean, Rachel Corrie was an activist.
Yes.
Killed while protesting Israeli military actions.
Right.
So that doesn't exactly fit the image of the U.S.
As the protector.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
And then Shoshana Johnson.
Yeah, she was a soldier captured in the same ambush as Jessica Lynch.
Right.
But her story didn't get nearly the same attention.
No, it didn't.
Makes you wonder if race played a role there.
Or even the image.
Yeah,
Like they were looking for a specific type of hero.
I think so.
Someone that fit the mold.
Yes,
Which kind of ties into that whole us versus them thing
it does.
that we always see.
That us versus them dynamic,
Yeah.
that's so common in wartime propaganda.
Totally. And when you bring in Orientalism,
Uh-huh.
it gets even more complex.
It does.
So what exactly is Orientalism?
So it's a concept that Edward Said,
Okay.
this brilliant scholar, he wrote about it extensively. Essentially, it's the idea that the West portrays itself as civilized and rational,
Okay.
while the East, or in this case the Middle East, is cast as this barbaric and inherently dangerous place.
So like this inherent bias
Yes.
that shapes how we see other cultures.
Exactly. And you see it playing out in the Jessica Lynch story.
Okay.
The Iraqi soldiers, the Fedayeen,
Uh-huh.
they were portrayed as these like shadowy figures,
Oh, yeah.
almost inhuman in their brutality.
Right.
It feeds into that fear of the other,
Yeah.
the unknown.
Okay, so then how does that apply to the Iraqi civilians?
Well, they're mostly absent from the positive side of the story.
Right.
Except, of course, for Muhammad.
The heroic informant.
Exactly. He becomes the exception.
Okay.
That proves the rule.
I see.
The good native who helps the West.
Right.
It reinforces that idea that it's not the Iraqi people.
Okay.
It's their leaders.
Like Saddam Hussein?
Saddam Hussein, exactly.
So it's justifying the war
It is a very convenient way.
by saying, like, we're here to liberate these people
Exactly.
from their oppressors.
Right, and it overlooks any of the complexities of the
Right.
situation.
Yeah, because there were a lot of Iraqis that opposed Saddam Hussein,
There were.
but didn't necessarily want the U.S. to invade.
Right.
Things are never black and white,
They're not.
especially with war.
Especially with war.
And Lynch even talked about how kind the Iraqi doctors and nurses that treated her were,
She did.
but that didn't really change anything in the media.
It didn't fit with the narrative
You know,
that
that's
they
true.
had already created.
It's like the nuance just didn't fit.
It didn't.
So then they told the story again and again.
Right.
And still somehow Iraqis are portrayed as untrustworthy.
Yeah. Like in that ABC interview with
Yeah.
Diane Sawyer,
Yes.
there's a scene where they show Iraqi men,
Okay.
but it's this grainy, shaky footage.
Oh.
It's like something out of a horror film.
Yeah, like they're trying to make you scared
Exactly.
of the Iraqi people.
Effective propaganda. But so the initial narrative, this all-American girl
Yeah,
rescued from evil, it was really powerful.
it was.
But then a few weeks after she was rescued,
Okay.
the BBC,
Yeah.
they aired this investigative report.
Warspin.
Warspin, yes.
Yes, I remember this.
You do.
It's a big deal.
It was John Campner, the reporter. He started really digging into the story,
Okay.
interviewing people at the hospital where Lynch was held.
Okay.
And what he found was pretty shocking.
So a lot of the details of her rescue weren't exactly true.
To say the least.
Okay.
Her injuries weren't from gunshots or stabbings.
Right.
Like they initially said.
He said she was brutally attacked.
Yes.
But that wasn't true.
No, they were consistent with a vehicle accident.
Oh, wow.
So the Iraqi doctors, they had actually provided excellent care.
Oh, wow.
And they had even tried to return her to U.S. forces.
Really?
Days before the rescue.
Yeah.
But the ambulance was fired on.
So the whole rescue was staged.
It seems that way.
They went in.
The hospital was already secured
Wow.
by U.S. forces.
That's crazy.
It was filmed for propaganda.
So much of that story was manipulated.
It was.
It really makes you think about the media's role in all of this.
It does.
So why do you think the U.S. media didn't really cover the BBC report?
I mean, it was a huge revelation.
It was.
Why do you think they downplayed it?
I think maybe because they had already invested so much in the first story
Right.
that to admit they were wrong would make them look bad.
It wouldn't be good for their credibility.
No, it wouldn't.
And they probably didn't want to challenge the government's story.
Yeah, especially during wartime.
Especially during wartime.
Plus, the Jessica Lynch story was making them a lot of money.
It was.
So they wanted to keep that going.
Book deals, movie rights.
Interviews.
Yeah, it was generating a lot of revenue.
So there was a financial reason
Absolutely.
to keep the story alive.
And then in November 2003,
Okay.
just in time for Veterans Day,
What perfect time?
the perfect opportunity to reignite that patriotic fervor
Right.
and really cash in.
Goes out, I Am a Soldier too.
Yes.
And NBC even aired a movie.
Saving Jessica Lynch.
Right.
And ABC got that interview.
With Diane Sawyer.
Yes.
It was everywhere.
It was a media frenzy.
And even though they acknowledged the inconsistencies,
Yeah,
they still mostly focused on how heroic it all was.
they did, and they used it to promote patriotism and support for the war.
So they were trying to have it both ways.
It seems like it.
Acknowledge that maybe things weren't exactly how they were reported,
Right.
but still focus on the heroism.
And this was all happening as the Abu Ghraib scandal was starting to come out.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
U.S. soldiers abusing Iraqi prisoners.
And there were women involved, too.
Yes.
Which is the complete opposite of the Jessica Lynch story.
It is a stark contrast.
So maybe the Jessica Lynch story was meant to distract from all that,
It's a possibility
like to create a feel-good story.
to boost public support. It brings us back to Kumar's main point.
That women in the military doesn't automatically equal progress.
Exactly.
It's more complicated than that.
Much more.
We need to look at the bigger picture.
We do.
Like, why are these stories being told?
And who benefits from them?
It's like a reminder to be critical
Yes.
of what we see and hear,
Especially during war.
especially during war.
The Jessica Lynch story.
Yeah.
It shows how complex things really are.
When you look at gender and war and media, yeah, it really shows how complicated war is.
And you know, Kumar makes this interesting point about how the military will often use the idea of women's liberation to kind of justify its actions.
Okay.
Even when those actions are violent.
Right.
Or they lead to suffering.
Yeah, like, look, we're progressive. Women can fight too.
You're right.
But it's really a way to make what they're doing seem okay.
Exactly. It's a shield
Yeah.
to deflect any criticism.
And it's not even just about women fighting.
Right.
It's about how women are portrayed.
In every part of war.
Right from the home front.
From the home front to the
From
battlefield.
the battlefield.
The stories we tell really affect how we see war
That's a trick.
and how we justify it.
So you wanted to understand how stories about women at war are made.
Yeah,
And I think we really dug deep with this Jessica Lynch story.
we did.
It's a perfect example
Yeah.
of how a story can be created for a specific reason.
To play into stereotypes,
Yeah.
to make people feel things,
Uh-huh.
to change how people see a war.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that we can't just believe everything we hear,
Especially with war.
right? We have to think critically
Absolutely.
and ask who is benefiting from these stories.
Exactly.
So what do you think?
Well, how can we be more aware of this manipulation
Right.
as consumers of media?
Yeah,
And how can we really make things better for women?
not just giving them uniform.
Exactly.
That's a great question.
It is.
It's not about saying that women shouldn't be in the military,
Right.
but it's about really understanding
Yeah.
how gender and war and the media, they all work together,
They do.
and questioning those simple stories
Yes.
and demanding more truthful and complex portrayals of women's experiences in conflict.
I think so.
I think the Jessica Lynch story really shows why that's so important.
It does.
It's a story that still matters today.
It does.
So keep asking questions.
Yes.
And don't be afraid to challenge the stories you're told.
That's what makes this so insightful.
That's what makes a deep dive great.
It is.
Thanks for listening.